All right, good evening. Welcome to our Wake County Board of Education meeting. It's our regular scheduled meeting today, June 2nd, 6:15. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but I would like to call this meeting to order. Before we get started, we'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance and then do our roll call. Well, to ensure that we've got the quorum. Let's go through the roll call. Keith Sutton here as chair. Ms. Cash?
Yes, I'm here.
Christine Kushner?
Yes, here. Thank you.
Jim Martin?
Yes, here. Thank you.
Heather Scott?
Here, thank you.
Bill Fletcher? Mr. Fletcher? Monica Johnson-Hostler?
Here, thank you.
Lindsay Mahaffey?
I am here, Chair Sutton.
All right. Chris Haggerty?
Here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Fletcher again. Okay, so Mr. Fletcher is not with us, it seems. We're going to look out for him if he comes on. So right now we do have a quorum present. If you all would stand with me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the
Flag,
United States of America.
The United
America,
States of America,
and to the
to the republic for which it stands,
One
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
Under God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and
Justice
justice for
and
all.
justice for all.
All right, thank you for that. All right, we'll start with our information agenda. Start with Superintendent's Comments. Superintendent Moore.
Good evening. I'd like to take a moment to recognize our 11,200 graduates who've already started collecting diplomas during well-organized and well-attended school-based ceremonies. Wake Young Men's and Wake Young Women's Leadership Academies, Vernon Malone and North Wake College and Career Academies, Wake STEM Early College, Knightdale High, and Southeast Raleigh Magnet High have all held on-site graduation celebrations. Sanderson and Wakefield high schools will hold ceremonies this week, while the majority of our comprehensive high schools will host both on-site and virtual celebrations next week. Safety measures are firmly in place, and I want to thank everyone who has participated thus far in observing social distancing guidelines. Your cooperation has been critical to the success of these events. The ceremonies look different this year, but the intent and the emotion behind them are identical to any graduation of years past. Students and families who have attended these events have celebrated with the same elation and pride that is on full display every year at this time. They are indeed celebrations, and our principals, staff, and families have worked well together to make them so. I'm beyond proud of the grace and resilience that has been displayed by the class of 2020. While you have missed out on many of the usual rites of passage of a senior, we are certain that this experience has served to make you stronger, reinforcing your resolve to build the brightest futures possible for yourselves. Please know that we've done everything possible to honor your achievement under the circumstances, and my warmest, heartfelt congratulations to each and every graduating senior. On a separate topic, Chair Sutton and I sent a message to our families and staff yesterday about the critical importance of our school district's core beliefs as we witness our nation's racial inequities explode in anger, fear, and frustration. In that message, we made it clear that if children master academics but fail to appreciate the value of inclusivity, respect, and diversity, we as adults have fallen short of preparing them for tomorrow. I would like to take a moment to extend that comment just a bit. When I speak of the role that adults play in the lives of children, I'm talking about all adults, every single one of us. But there is a sacred trust between children and those who work in our schools. That is why I believe all WCPSS employees, administrators, support staff, teachers are obligated beyond the words of any employment contract to meet the highest standards. Do we really appreciate how often children watch what we do, as well as hear what we say? Do all of them believe that their lives do matter to us? I have no interest in returning to normal when this pandemic ends. For too many students, normal means their potential may be discounted, their culture is questioned, and their actions are viewed with suspicion. That is not normal, it's abhorrent, and we are all essential in the fight against racism if we expect to improve the life of every child. There is no comfortable path forward. We must confront the ways in which race defines our nation, our communities, and our schools. But if we wish to prepare all students for tomorrow, we have no choice. It is literally the work that we do. I expect that all of us will hold each other accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. I do want to acknowledge that Mr. Fletcher has joined us. Mr. Fletcher, are you here?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. We have everyone present now for the record. Again, thank you for those comments, Superintendent Moore. I too want to congratulate our graduates that have begun receiving their diplomas. I was thrilled to get by Southeast Raleigh's celebration last week, and so many of the others that have started and that will continue. So again, congratulations to our graduates, and most of all, hats off to you again for your perseverance and your strength over this past year, and we wish you well. As Superintendent Moore indicated, we sent a message and statement about our core beliefs yesterday, and got a lot of positive comments from those. A few not so positive, but we think that was an important statement to make, given some of the actions that have occurred here recently both in our district and in our community and across the country. I think it was timely to hear about student discipline and equity work that's going on to improve the environment and culture in our district. I think as a country and our community, we are in precarious times right now as we try to make sense of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and others that have come before him. I ask our community to be thoughtful in your response and in support as you show solidarity to the movement that is going across our country. I ask that our community be safe. I do want to emphasize that violence and destruction is not the answer. And I want to say to our young people, both students and those that are involved in the Wake County Public School System, and as a African-American man who has some level of experience with this struggle, I ask you to be thoughtful, to be safe, and together let's find a way to constructively address these issues and bring about the change that is necessary. So with that, I will turn over to the rest of the board for comments, starting with Vice Chair Roxy Cash.
Thank you. Superintendent Moore, I'm glad to see you back with us. I'm sorry for the hard week you've had, and I appreciate you being with us tonight. So wanted to say that, as well as congratulations to, on a different note, congratulations to the graduates. And there are a lot of festivities coming forward, very different note, but thank you for that as well. Looking forward to that. And I want to give a shout out to Denisha is her name. She is a child caregiver at one of our child care centers who my son, this means a lot to me, my son who has a small business downtown across from the bell tower where a lot of the protests started last evening and was peacefully started, and he had a business there, but the child care workers at his two children's daycare center came out to stand with him and be with him. And I appreciate that. They were awesome. And some of their church members came as well. And it was a great night for Andrew as they march forward with the very peaceful demonstration last night outside of his small business downtown. So I want to thank Denisha for doing that. So that's all my remarks tonight.
Sorry. Thank you, Mrs. Cash. Mrs. Kushner.
Good evening. Thank you. Has been quite a week. I thank the commissioners for including us in their work session last week. It was a lot of great information, and the staff did a wonderful job presenting them with more details about our budget request. I was able to start my morning at Sanderson High School this morning. It was a joyful time to celebrate their graduates. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance, so that's still be ringing in my head. And the families were able to celebrate their student and pose for pictures a little less rushed and not fight for parking. But it was bittersweet. It was a needed, joyful morning in what has been a very difficult last week. So my heart is with our community and thinking of our students and our educators as we go forward, because there's a lot of hurt in our community. So we need to address it as a board. The equity work that was discussed was hopeful, and I hope we can stay focused on that. And the reopening, there's a lot of uncertainty. As Chair Sutton, thank you for bringing that discussion to us. And I think there's going to be a lot more questions and direction that we need as board members, but the BACs are public meetings. I want the community to know that they can attend virtually one or two of your BAC meetings. Stay engaged, give us your feedback. We want to hear from students. We want to hear from parents and families. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Mrs. Kushner. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. I too want to begin by congratulating all of the graduates. It was really fun to celebrate with the Wake Young Men's Leadership Academy and the Wake Young Women's Leadership Academy. The staff at both schools did a fantastic job of setting up a very effective format to both recognize the students and celebrate with their families while keeping safe. So hats off to a job very well done. Two other schools in my district, Vernon Malone and Wake STEM, also had graduations at the same time, so I couldn't be both places at once, but look forward to the rest of the graduations coming up in the future. So hats off to the 2020 graduates. We need you. We need you to change our world. Like Ms. Kushner noted, very pleased with the constructive discussions we've had with the county commissioners surrounding the budget. We're in a strange time. And we have challenges with the budget. If we look at just a normal budget, and then we've got the COVID-19 crisis on top of everything else. So, I think we've had good conversations. There's good lines of communication that hopefully will take us to a strong place. As I've mentioned before in our budget discussions, and just want to reiterate though, as we look at budgets, it's going to be very easy for us to look at the acute of now, which we need to do. Trying to figure out a budget for this year is what we have to do right now. But I just want to keep in our thinking and our planning that we want to avoid some of the mistakes of the 2008 recession, because we cannot afford to spend another decade digging out of a recession, and we can't have multiple years where a recession is sort of an excuse for more cuts on the schools. So I just encourage us, all of us as a community, to start now thinking about not just this year's budget, but the long term. Finally, I too, want to address some of the other events of the last couple of weeks. My head, my heart are just torn with, starting with the irresponsible death of George Floyd, seeing, the police lines right here in Raleigh, seeing some of the social media posts that we've had going around, even in our own school system. We have more than one epidemic going on right now, more than one virus. We have the physical virus of COVID-19, but I don't think one can deny that racism is a virus and it is equally deadly. And I think it's appropriate for us to think about dealing with racism in a public health kind of context. And we're all thinking about that a whole lot more than we were before. I think it's important to recognize that in a lot of public health actions, a lot of what we do isn't as much about protecting us as an individual as it is protecting our community. And as we protect our community, we actually are protecting us. And I really think that mindset is going to be important as we tackle the virus of racism as much as when we tackle the virus of COVID-19. And herein, I would like to offer particularly to my white colleagues, but to all of us in positions of decision-making authority, whether it's board members, elected officials, principals, teachers, you name it, I'd like to encourage us to think about our own face mask. A face mask is not to muzzle us. It's not to prevent speech. And it's not even as much to protect ourselves as it is to protect others. The purpose of a face mask is to sort of filter what we're saying, what we're thinking, what comes out of us. And if we can think about a metaphorical face mask for those of us who make any decision or are in any position of authority, and ask ourselves, wait a minute, what are we saying? How is it going to be heard by the person who's hearing it? When we make a decision, if we were the student, if we were the parent, would we be hearing what would be important for us to hear? As we're making decisions, or interacting with a student or a parent, if we look at that person and say, if this person had a different skin color, or we're a different person, would we react differently? If we just take that time to ask ourselves those filtering questions, I think we're going to begin the process of the public health changing and getting this virus under control so that we can do the systemic work so that every child, every person has the opportunity that they need. So particularly my white brothers and sisters, we have a huge responsibility to ask those questions of ourselves to make sure that our response is one that any human being should have. So thank you for the opportunity to share a few comments.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you and good evening. I would like to start out my comments by congratulating the graduates of Nightdale High School. I was able to, they had their personal in-person ceremonies staggered throughout 3 days, and I was able to be there for the first, for a portion of the first one. It was very special. All of the families who were able to attend thanked Mr. Richardson, the principal, and all of the other staff members for what they did. So I know it was not the same, but it was still very meaningful. Also at a nice thing that happened at Rollsville High School, they had reached out to the community to come and help clean up the campus a little bit. Mr. Fletcher has had many conversations about what we can and cannot do with our, with facilities and with how we do the best that we can. So we've certainly had those discussions, but there was a little bit of cleaning up. They want to make their own event very special, and the community really responded. I could not be there personally, but it was really amazing. And when you think about the community coming together and how we can call and ask someone, can you please come help clean up my school? Can you please come, bring some brooms? We saw the community coming together to clean up after the events on Saturday evening in Raleigh, and we see the community coming together. It's easier because we see that. We don't see necessarily our own implicit bias, and we cannot necessarily see the racist thoughts, but we can see the aftermath, and we can see the damage, and we can hear the damage and the trauma that so many people experience. And so I wonder, can we come together as a community to examine and to clean our own implicit bias that leads to these damaging behaviors that happen again? And I know the answer to that is yes. I know it. There was a social media post today from the Nightdale Police Department, and I encourage you to read it for yourself. To summarize, they were warned about potential riots, potential damage, potential protests. And so they went out and they met the community. They met the members of the community, the demonstrators who were there. And they said they were expecting this in their minds, but they went and saw, no, what we need is peace. What we need is understanding. And what we need is to come together and to work. And they took a knee and they had a moment with those demonstrators. That is the work that we need to commit to do. And you're not always going to see it. It's not always going to be something that you look at and you say, you know, that bush needs to be trimmed. This is something you have to examine constantly in your heart. And we do that by listening, by meeting people where they are. And that ultimately is the start of the healing that I know our community is capable of doing, and I know the majority wants to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott. Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. I too would like to shout out for all the graduates and the challenges that we've had and that you've had and you've experienced. Certainly the class of 2020 will have a very unique place in the history of Wake County, and certainly the experiences we've had this year will, I'm sure, remain emblazoned upon your memory. Couple of comments. A writer, business guy by the name of Keith Cunningham has written a book called The Road Less Stupid. And I heard him in a blog, in a interview not long ago when he was calling the COVID experience, and he called it an asteroid. We had no defense against the asteroid. All we can do is say, we've been hit by an asteroid. What do we do now? And his intense recommendations and plea is for those of us who are having to redesign our systems and figure out how to reopen the schools, is that we plan and expect another asteroid. So as we plan to reopen schools and we look at how are we going to do teaching and learning, how are we going to keep our students engaged in productive activities, how are we going to support our teachers who may have their own health concerns, how are we going to do all of these things? We need to do it in a way that will give us a strong footing so that when the next asteroid comes, a resurgence of COVID-19, for example, or something else, that we are in a much better position than we were on March 13, when we had to spring into action and create an entirely different way of educating and communicating with our community. So I know Lloyd Gardner is providing great leadership to our core team. The questions and the myriad of questions, you answer one question and there are going to be 5 more that pop up. I'm hopeful that I expect the board will have some input to some of those things as we move forward. I have great confidence in Lloyd and his leadership and the core team that's been assembled to put together strategies to do just this, to give us a process, a system for reading, for teaching and learning that will survive the next asteroid. And finally, I'd like to say that, you know, our founding documents of this country say we're all created equal. And I believe that. My faith tells me that. My faith tells me that God created us in his image. I believe that. And so I guess the challenge then becomes, how do we navigate the differences that God gave us to build relationships? And do we have the willingness to do that? To talk to someone who's different than we are, to step forward and to make a relationship with someone who's very different than us, who may have a language barrier, may have a very different socioeconomic status, ethnic, international background. It's incumbent upon each of us to build relationships and to tear down the barriers that exist, however they got erected. And I would encourage the folks in our community to just reflect personally and to say, okay, when I meet someone later tonight or tomorrow, what is my opportunity to better understand that person and to break down the barriers that exist between us, and then to act on that? Because it's going to be each of us touching one person. It's not going to be government passing some magic bill that's going to change our approach to each other. It's going to take each of us making a personal commitment to engage and interact and to build positive relationships with folks who are different than we are. And I encourage my folks to do that, and I hope they will. I appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Much appreciated. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. And Mr. Fletcher, we share the same faith, and I certainly share the same belief, but I'm not sure at age 45 that I believe Americans actually share that belief. And clearly, I can't say that I ever thought we would be here, but in terms of reflecting, of course, I'm raising a Black daughter, and we've spent much of the last 30 days reflecting on the impact that COVID has had on African American folks. Our bodies and as Black bodies and brown bodies are being shot daily for no reason at all. And quite frankly, America isn't really collectively asking for a response for those things. And so I can't help but to say, as someone who remains optimistic, that realism has set in, that I don't really believe that in my lifetime, we will see the real change. What I do certainly believe is that my daughter's generation just might. While we've seen and heard of our students and adults trivializing and quite frankly agitating the narrative around what's happening in this country for Black people has quite frankly been anti-Black, and there's no other way to put that. But what I can say is watching young people who are invested in doing right, quite frankly, has shown up in ways that I've not seen adults do. They have really embraced the calling in culture, not the calling out culture. So saying to people who are really ready to have the hard conversation that they embrace that. And I do believe adults, Mr. Fletcher, will do this one-on-one. But what we can say is until we really create system change, and I agree there's no sweeping policies or laws, because if so, I do believe we would have done those. But I do believe by addressing systemic barriers like we talked about today, with the racial disparities that continue to plague not just Wake County, but all of our school systems, that all of those things are symptoms to a greater issue that our country has yet to address. And that's the systemic racism that continues to exist. And it will take each of us, but it'll also take us collectively as systems to be willing to reimagine a new way forward. And and that's not just for the kids who are in my space. Many of us as board members had the opportunity to be on the Zoom call with our Wake Indian Education Program, and we heard those students in that space as well so eloquently describe to us how they feel unseen and unheard sitting in a classroom. They were able to give examples to the teachers who were on that phone, on that Zoom call, about ways to which that they could acknowledge their presence. Because what I will tell you that Black and brown folks are asking for is to be seen for who we are in our full authenticity, and acknowledging that that we are not all free. And I'm going to end with a quote by, some of you may be familiar with her. Her name is Roxane Gay, and her quote that I'll leave you with is, "The rest of the world yearns to get back to normal. For Black people, normal is everything from which we yearn to be free." Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Ms. Mahaffey.
We had a 5-year-old issue. Congratulations to our class of 2020. It is the start of what will be some very memorable graduations. As Ms. Johnson-Hostler mentioned, we met with our Wake County Indian Education Program folks. Our Title VI coordinator, Gwen Locklear, does a yeoman's work in helping our Native students access their culture, their community. We got to hear from tribal leaders as well as parents and some of our students, and making sure, as Ms. Johnson-Hostler said, that they feel seen and heard in our, and a part of our community is so important. I grew up near a reservation, and they were the largest minority population. And here we have students from many, many different tribes. So for them to be able to access their culture and have their identity present is very, very important. This month is also Pride Month, making sure that our LGBTQIA students feel safe in the classroom. And as we look at the impact, the deaths of the latest deaths of Mr. George Floyd and Breonna Taylor have, I encourage parents who have never considered talking about race with their children to do so, to have those conversations with their students. It is important. Other parents are having to do this. It is more and more necessary because we don't live in a colorblind society, and we cannot continue to say that we are colorblind. We have to make sure we work to understand and hear the voices of people who are hurting in our community and help them. In some of the reading that I've done this week, I came across a quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu of, there comes a point where we need to just stop pulling people out of the river and we need to go upstream and find out why. And I think we're being told by members of the Black community why this is happening, and we need to listen, and we need to have open minds, open hearts, and those are my comments for tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. First, I'd like to welcome back Superintendent Moore. We extend our prayers to your family for your loss. And I just want you to know that we are thankful for your leadership. I'd really like to focus the rest of my comments on the pain and outrage over the murder of George Floyd, especially so soon after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. How we react and how we respond will be watched by the community and the world. And it's easy, I think, for some of us to feel helpless and not know what to say or how to react. But we, especially those of us who live in privilege, we cannot morally take the easy road and just rest in inaction. We all must examine what it is we can do and where we can make an impact. And I think for those of us on the board, it may mean a greater scrutiny of our SRO policy. It may mean examination of our disciplinary procedures and any inconsistencies, the inconsistencies in punishment by race. It may mean more attention to what those who teach young formative minds say and do in their classrooms. It may be taking a hard look at the unfair barriers that deny access to opportunity. I want to echo what Superintendent Moore said. This cannot be a return to normal. What we do has to be turning the page to a new chapter. Now, as we turn the page, it's time to take a look at how as a board we're going to go forward. We are closing down our 2019-2020 school year. It's been a year like no other. We've experienced countless challenges, and there are more ahead on the horizon. I want to acknowledge the efforts of staff and teachers, of whom so much has been asked during this time, who've had their own challenges with their own families as we respond to the crisis. And I just want to say thank you. I think it's now time for us as a board to resume our statutory role, to resume our committee work, to resume the important work we've engaged in with RTI, to develop a new vision for the future of our schools. As a board, we need to be involved in the discussions about school safety and reopening safely and properly. It will be a lot of work to face the lingering challenges of COVID-19 while not abandoning the other crucial work of our district. And I want to make that point. Response to COVID-19 has been our priority, but other important work must go on. Work that needs to be done to help heal our community. But again, it's not going to be easy. We do not have the luxury of taking the easy road. We must be all in together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hagerty. Appreciate those comments. All right, that concludes our Board of Superintendent comments. With that, I will entertain a motion to approve tonight's meeting agenda.
Mr. Chair, Bill Fletcher, I will move approval of the meeting agenda.
Christine
Yes, I will second that.
Mr. Chair, before we vote, I have a question about the agenda.
Sure.
Really quickly, under one of the consent items, I see a waiver of BAC policy.
Yes, sir.
And I know in the work session, we did talk about attempting to hold BAC meetings. What would be most people's fourth BAC meeting before the end of June? Is the waiver of this policy still needed?
Yes, we wanted to make sure that we weren't rushed in order to get those meetings in the policy. We called for meetings and the meeting of the BAC chairs. So even if we're able to get in, if some members are able to get in, there are 2 additional meetings that are needed, and I think some have gotten in 3 and only need 1, it still may be difficult for us to get in the chairs meeting. So in an abundance of caution, we were going to move forward with asking for a waiver of that policy so that we don't find ourselves in a crunch trying to meet our own or find ourselves out of compliance with our own policy.
That makes perfect sense to me. I thank you for the explanation.
Yes, sir. Not a problem. Got a motion by Mr. Fletcher and a second by Mrs. Kushner to approve tonight's meeting agenda. I'll start with the roll call vote. Mr. Fletcher.
Aye.
Ms. Johnson-Hosmer.
Aye.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Aye.
Mr. Hagerty.
Aye.
Mrs. Cash.
Aye.
Mrs. Kushner.
Aye.
Dr. Martin.
Aye.
Mrs. Scott.
Aye.
That's all votes are unanimous to approve tonight's meeting agenda. And so that is approved. That takes us to our public comment. Our residents wishing to address the Wake County Board of Education may submit their comments or video by noon the day of the meeting. That link can be found at wcpss.net. Comments may be submitted in writing or by posting a video. Following citizens have submitted comments as part of our public comment portion of this evening's agenda. Their comments can be found on the same online agenda we are using for tonight's meeting. That agenda, as well as guidelines for those wishing to submit comments for future virtual meetings, can be found also at our website, wcpss.net, under the tab labeled School Board. We have 25 public comments tonight. Those who submitted comments and the topics are Megan Balch, Special Education Seclusion and Restraint. Karen Santa Maria, Track 4 on the calendar proposal. Scott Morelli, School Calendar. Dominique Shaw, Employee Comments about Racial Violence. Bay Scroggins on COVID-19. Bridget Udiback, Single Track School Calendar. Caroline Forrest, Inappropriate School Video. Allison Teska, Dropout Rate. Melinda Morrison, Access to Online Assignments. Lee Williams, Composting in Schools. Julie Hosen, Location of Public Comments Online. Ronald Bryant, Collaboration with WCPSS Board of Education. Martha McAllister, Special Education Needs in 2020-2021. Peter Bly, Secondary Math Curriculums. Fernando Martinez and Lita Muhammad, Comprehensive Plan for Equitable Discipline Practice. Mandy Westinghouse, Inadequate Online Learning. Stephen Carlson, Employee Access to CAP Schools. Andrew Johnson, 2020 Summer Hours. Carrie Bly, Secondary Math Curriculums. Jennifer Lawson, Publicizing Policy Changes. Randall Burrows, Inappropriate School Video. And then due to a Google form error, there were 4 public comments relating to calendar changes that were submitted without full names. They are also included in the public comment summary attached to tonight's agenda. So with that, we'll move to our consent agenda. So I will entertain a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda.
Sutton, this is Christine Kushner. I move approval of the consent items as listed.
Jim Martin, second.
All right, got a motion and a second to approve tonight's consent agenda. Again, by roll call vote, Mrs. Cash.
Aye. Aye.
Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Mrs. Scott,
Aye.
Mr. Hegarty,
Aye.
Mrs. Mahaffey,
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson-Hostler,
Aye.
and Mr. Fletcher.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. And so the tonight's consent agenda is approved by unanimous vote. We have one action item on for tonight, and that is the 2020-2021 instructional calendars, which include the traditional modified multi-track year-round Wake Leadership Academies, Wake STEM Early College, and Knightdale High School, and the Young Men's and Women's Leadership Academies, along with the early colleges. That is being brought by Wade Martin and again to Monty Anderson Powell. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Martin.
Good evening, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members. Again, with me this evening is Tamani Anderson Powell, one of our directors in our magnet programs, and she's joining me as one of the members of our calendar committee. Ms. Anderson Powell typically is the chairperson of our annual calendar committee parent sessions, where we bring in many of the members of the community to provide feedback on our calendar. So she is certainly a tremendous resource and understands how calendars have evolved from year to year based on parent and community input. So welcome her tonight. Tonight we do bring you proposed calendars for our 2020-2021 school year for our traditional modified multi-track, our year-round, the multi-track year-round, as well as our early colleges that include Knightdale High School. The calendar committee proposes these updates to our instructional calendars to address session law updates that impact the previously approved 2020-21 calendars. The proposed instructional calendars for each, the traditional, modified, the multi-track year-round calendars, the Wake Leadership Academies, Wake STEM, Knightdale High School, as well as our North Wake College and Career Academy, Vernon Malone College Career Academy, and Wake Early College of Health Science all meet the required 1,025 instructional hours. They incorporate all new session law updates, as well as they do not exceed our 215 contractual days that are required. I would share, just again, share with the general community and public that we shared these draft calendars with the board during the last work session on May 19th, as well as this evening, we finished up with our early college calendars. So we were able to engage the community with lots of input opportunities, as well as staff through the mechanisms that our communications department was able to establish. So we do appreciate all of the feedback and input from the community as we worked on these drafts. So this evening, our calendar committee is seeking board approval of these proposed calendars. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Can I entertain a motion to approve the 2020-2021 instructional calendars for the schools as listed?
Chair Sutton, I entertain a motion to approve those calendars.
So motion made by Mrs. Cash. Second by Dr. Martin. And we'll start the roll call vote. Mr. Fletcher.
Before we do that, I just think it's important, I think Ms. Cash might want to do this, to just reinforce that this is no decision on the track 4 single track 4 calendar. That's not part of the motion. That will come at a later time. So just a reminder for the public.
Thank you, Jim Martin.
Martin, thank you for pointing that out. I should have made that clear.
Any other questions? Any other further discussion? Hearing none. Seeing none. Mr. Martin? I'm sorry. Mr. Fletcher.
Aye.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Aye. Aye.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Aye.
Mr. Haggerty.
Aye.
Mrs. Scott.
Aye.
Dr. Martin.
Aye.
Mrs. Kushner.
Aye.
Mrs. Cash.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. And so again, a unanimous vote for approval of the 2020-2021 instructional calendars passes with a unanimous vote.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you both, Mr. Martin and Mrs. Powell. Good to see you. Can I entertain a motion to go into closed session for the items listed on our agenda?
Chair Sutton, I'd like to make a motion to go into closed session for the following: to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-31811A1, A3, and A6, and 115C Schlott versus WCPSS 1C file number 19-725074, and Walker versus WCPSS 1C file number 19-015296, to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-31811A3, and to consider confidential student information protected under GS 115C-402 and the Family Educational and Privacy Rights Act 20 USC 1232G.
All right, and can I get a second?
I second Bill Fletcher.
All right, got a motion by Mrs. Cash and a second by Mr. Fletcher to go into closed session for the items just stated and as listed on the agenda. And again, we'll go by roll call vote. Mrs. Cash.
Aye.
Mrs. Kushner.
Aye.
Dr. Martin. Mrs. Scott.
Aye.
Mr. Haggerty.
Aye.
Mrs. Mahaffey.
Aye.
Ms. Johnson.
Lindsay Mahaffey.
Aye.
And Mr. Fletcher.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Unanimous vote for us to go into closed session for the items stated. And for the record, Mr. Bloomberg, I know you're here. I've seen you. Didn't call you for the role either, but just wanted to make sure that all knew that you were present as well.
Absolutely present, following it intently. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, well, that does it for our agenda. We are now standing closed session. Thank you all for joining us for our monthly meeting this evening, and we stand adjourned. Thank you so much.
Did it go in?
Yeah, Will's right here. All right. All right, since we're back in a open public meeting, I'm gonna go back and do the roll call vote. Not the roll call. Yeah, a roll call. President, Mrs. Cash,
Present.
Mrs. Cook,
Present.
Dr. Martin, Dr. Martin, you're with us. Mrs. Scott,
Present.
Sorry, I had it muted.
okay, no problem. Mr. Haggerty,
Here, present.
Ms. Mahaffey,
Present.
Mr. Hospital, Mr. Fletcher, I got you.
Here.
Okay. All right, we got a quorum, so we'll move forward. If I can entertain a motion to approve the HR appointments.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we approve the superintendent's administrative appointments and the other HR issues for renewal of contracts,
Including non-renewal of contracts.
including the non-renewal.
Thank you.
There's-
Second.
All right, I got a motion by Mr. Fletcher and a second by Mrs. Kushner to approve HR recommendations and the other items in form of non-renewal of contracts. I'll start with the roll call vote. Mr. Fletcher,
Aye.
Mrs. Mahaffey,
Aye.
Mr. Haggerty,
Aye.
Mrs. Scott,
Aye.
Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Mrs. Kushner,
Aye.
Ms. Cash.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. That's a vote of 8-0 with Johnson Hostler being absent in support of the HR recommendations and other items, including non-renewals. Mr. Bloomberg, you had a settlement to announce?
This is to announce a fully executed settlement with CEPI Engineering and Construction in which CEPI agreed to pay WCPS $24,000 as a full resolution of the matter. Thank you.
Okay. And just for the record, Ms. Johnson Hostler is present now. Hostler? I think that takes care of all of our business for tonight. If I could entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Mr. Fletcher to adjourn, second by Mr. Haggerty. Mrs. Cash,
Aye.
Ms. Kushner,
Aye.
Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Mrs. Scott,
Aye.
Mr. Haggerty,
Aye.
Mrs. Mahaffey, Ms. Mahaffey, Ms. Johnson Hostler,
Aye.
Mr. Fletcher,
Aye.
Ms. Mahaffey?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. That's a 9-0 vote to adjourn tonight's meeting. So we stand adjourned. Thank you all so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everybody, good night. Be well.
Everybody,
Everybody.
you stay safe.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.